Welcome to all of you attending this session. We're very happy to have you with us today. You're in session number 6 of the Iowa Ideas Conference, and I am your moderator, Chris Esperson. This session, The Cost of Living Crisis in Iowa, is within the policy track. Thank you so much to our sponsor, ITC Midwest, for letting us all attend free and, more importantly, help all of these connections with our panelists and making them happen today to improve our state. So our time together will include our discussion and addressing audience questions. All of our sessions have closed captioning access, and all of our sessions are being recorded. Please make this session meaningful to you and add your own questions to the chat. And now we're going to have our panelists briefly introduce themselves with their name, organization, and a brief summary of what their organization does connected to this topic. And I will start with Missy.
Thanks. I'm Missy Forbes. I'm the executive director of 4Cs, Community Coordinated Childcare in Iowa City. We do childcare advocacy, specifically finding innovative ways to lower costs for families in regards to childcare and the childcare expense that those who are working in the field take on.
Thank you. Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole Hempel. I work with YPN in Cedar Rapids. We do parenting education for parents in Cedar Rapids and then Jones County as well. Through that, we were able to offer help with kind of the cost of living with diapers, baby supplies, and all sorts of things for kiddos.
Wonderful. Sean.
Hey everybody, I am Sean Finn. I'm a policy analyst with Common Good Iowa. Common Good Iowa is a nonpartisan nonprofit. We do various policy research and advocacy, and one thing that we do on every couple of years is release a report on the cost of living in Iowa, in which we break down a basic bare bones family budget using federal and state data sources, and we give a sense of how Iowa families are doing compared to that budget and what we can do to improve the situation for Iowans.
Thank you, Michelle.
Good morning. I'm Michelle Book. I'm the CEO of Food Bank of Iowa. Food Bank of Iowa is one of 200 Feeding America food banks across the United States that work collaboratively to make sure no American need go to bed hungry. Our job is to find food, keep it safe, manage USDA food, and deliver it to the front door, side door, back door of over 700 smaller frontline partner agencies across our service area. You can learn more about Food Bank Iowa by going to our website, www.foodbankiowa.org.
Thank you all so much. I'm so excited to have all of you. What a wide variety of perspectives we have on this really important issue that are facing so many of our neighbors today. So, Missy, I'm going to start with you on our first official question. What are some of the biggest challenges Iowans face when trying to afford the cost of living in our state?
Well, the cost of childcare, as we know, is very expensive across the state, no matter if you live in a metropolitan area or an urban area or rural. An Iowan family with a median income pays between 10 to 14% of their income that goes towards childcare, whether you're in an in-home setting or in a center. 7% is considered affordable, and so it's a great expense. The cost of care is expensive too. The childcare workforce is the second lowest paid in the state, only right above dishwashers, just a penny or two more. So those are some of the challenges that we face. How do centers, specifically centers, pay their workforce more without passing those costs on to their consumer, which are families? So those are some of the challenges in the field. It's hard work. It's important work. We need to recognize how important it is to pay the people in the field, and figure out innovative ways to not burden the families that are accessing that care with those costs.
Yeah, it's just amazing to think about people that are working in the field are unable to afford some of these other issues, and that's such a high cost for other Iowans. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Nicole, I'll turn to you.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be following Missy because I work with so many families who also are struggling with the cost of childcare. So many of our families are working two jobs just to be able to afford rent and groceries. And we're seeing that because of that, they're not able to spend time with their kids. I've had one parent tell me, she's like, I have to choose between being a mom and putting food on our table. And that's a huge issue when we're looking at raising our next generation of Iowans who we want to send forth with success. Um, Grocery prices are expensive, rent. A lot of our participants are struggling with the cost of rent. Um, Even with having multiple incomes, it's just really hard for them with the rising cost of things in Iowa.
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't even talked about housing, and that's a huge contributor as well. Thank you, Nicole. Sean.
So, to share a little bit from our most recent cost of living report, we found that about 1 in 7 Iowa families that include a full-time worker can't afford a bare bones family budget. So this is not even a budget that allows you to thrive and enjoy life and go out and seek out new opportunities or entertainment, enrichment for kids. This is just a very basic budget, and hundreds of that, over 100,000 Iowa families can't afford that. So we know that even though Iowa comes up on the lists of cost of living as being a pretty affordable state, all things considered, there's a lot of people in Iowa that cannot afford the cost of living in the state. And some of those big challenges, I'll echo what Missy and Nicole have already said. Childcare is a huge one. Childcare is just extremely expensive, and it can come up to the cost of people paying as much as they do for rent as they do for childcare. And another big challenge beyond just kind of those line items is that the system that we live in, our economic system in the state really gives advantages to the people who already have money. So if you already have money, you can go get your education, you can start a business, you can find other ways to advance your economic opportunity. And a lot of people who don't already have economic opportunity or don't already have money in the bank have a really hard time finding their footing and moving forward. So I'd say that system-wide perspective on the ways in which we don't allow people to advance economically is really a big challenge.
Thanks, Sean. Michelle.
Well, it all comes down to food at the end of the day. And with what Nicole said and Missy and Sean, I'd like to pull that together, and that 11% of Iowans live in poverty today. Poverty and food insecurity go hand in hand. And all of this was made increasingly more difficult during COVID. As we came out of COVID, we're talking about where we are today and why we're here today. As we came out of COVID era, support programs sunsetted, SNAP benefits decreased, unemployment benefits decreased, landlords were able to evict, utility companies were able to turn off the power. At the very same time, inflation hit us, and it hit all of us hard. And it resulted in many of us seeing economic impact as we try to go to the grocery store, pay for some other bills. But people that are already living on a tight budget were really squeezed by the lack of support and the increase in cost of living. Today, when I look back over the last year, we had 1.8 million points of service providing either meals or pantry services to Iowans. With that 11% of Iowans living in poverty, 1/3 of those Iowans are children. And obesity is a result of poverty and food insecurity, which becomes a bigger problem with Iowa's children and future success of Iowa's children.
Absolutely. So now we're having health enter the picture as we're looking at all these things as well. And I think that it kind of goes into our next question a little bit, thinking about the pandemic and how inflation hit at the same time. How did we get to this point? What have been the contributing factors? Missy, I'll start with you.
Um, I think that one of the things when we talk about the pay that the childcare workforce receives, many of those people working in the field are also on another form of assistance. So that's something to point out. When I was thinking about this question, I was thinking, the profession is undervalued. It's seen as babysitting and not as a valued form of work. But we know that the brain forms most rapidly during that 0 to 3. And so it's important that we value the work, but I think we've got a lot of work to do to get that to the point where we need to. I think that in my work, I feel I see all of the time that there's a disconnect between the business community and how important childcare is in regard to workforce. When we don't pay enough because we don't value the profession, we have trouble getting people to work in that field. So programs can't be fully open. So if classrooms aren't open, if childcare is not available, if classrooms close, then people leave the workforce, primarily women. And so we see that, that cycle of people leaving the workforce, and it's just kind of this never ending cycle. But I don't think that I'm dramatic when I say that childcare is the foundation upon which all other industry relies. And so somehow flipping that switch so that we can get to where we need to be. But I think that those are some contributing factors as to why we got here.
Yeah. And I appreciate you saying that because I think people think, well, I don't have a small child, this doesn't impact me. But we're actually seeing this across all of our areas of society. Seen number of times where I walk up to a business and they are closed unofficially because they don't have the staff for the day. So thank you for highlighting that and bringing us back to everybody on the call. Nicole.
I want to echo what Missy was saying. Childcare is so important. So many of the families we work with, they're trying to find jobs. Some of them have immigrated, some of them are refugees. We work with a wide range of families. And there's either not options because jobs aren't paying enough for what the job is and the hours they can work. So they can't afford childcare. So they have to stay home with their kid. And then because they're staying home with their kid, they don't have a job. So they can't afford to stay home with their kid. It's just like Missy was pointing out, this really vicious circle. And it really keeps people trapped in the location that they're in, and it prevents them from stepping up and thriving with their families, which is what we want to see in our community, is everyone being able to thrive and live in a way that they want to. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate that. And I love the way you both have been able to talk a little bit about how this is impacting individuals and families. Sean, as I turn to you, you're welcome to go in that lens or broaden out to a policy or society level as well.
Great. Yeah, I do kind of want to zoom out a little bit and talk about some three big things that come to mind for me on a kind of zoomed out policy or society level. One is that we can't really talk about the cost of living in Iowa without pointing out the racial inequities in the state. So even though Iowa is predominantly white, when we break down our cost of living numbers by race and ethnicity, we find that while about 15% of all households in the state of Iowa can't afford our basic needs budget, over a third of Black families with workers can't meet that budget. Over a quarter of Hispanic families can't meet that basic budget. So this is the result of historic and long-standing inequities in our policy system. There's a long history of discrimination in housing, employment, and education that causes generational effects. So if a family decades ago, hundreds of years ago, was unable to buy a house, was unable to get an education, that has impacts for their future generations that they can't pass on their wealth, they can't pass on their knowledge of what it was like to go to college. And this has especially been, problems with racist policies that the state has had, historically and to the current day. So I think one, we have to, we have to recognize the reality of that, that families of color in the state really are dealing with those long-term generational consequences. Another big thing that I want to point out is the slashing of collective bargaining rights and worker power in the state. Throughout, the last many decades, union density, the number of people who have been part of unions, has really declined heavily across the nation and in Iowa. And we know that historically, if we look back over time, when worker power is highest and union density is highest, that's when workers are doing the best. And that's when income inequality is at its lowest. So as Iowa has slashed collective bargaining rights for public sector workers, and also made it harder for unions to exist and perpetuate themselves, that is not good for working families. Last thing is that one way that we give out public supports is through the federal poverty level measure. And this measure was developed in the 1960s. It was taken using a very, the lowest cost of what a family needs to afford food and times 3. That's not the reality of what it costs to live anymore. And yet that's what our federal poverty level is still based on. And so when we look at, oh, we're giving supports to people who are in poverty, saying that people are in poverty means that they're really not getting by. There's a lot of people who are above that federal poverty level that really can't get by either. And so if we're basing our supports based on this measure that is no longer very relevant or reflective of our current economic situation, we're not giving the kind of support that our population really needs. So those are 3 big trends that I see in how we've gotten here today. There's a lot more, but those are the ones I wanted to highlight.
Really appreciate that. And Sean, I'm very grateful that you brought up the racial inequities that we're seeing. I think that's very important. And especially as we're going forward, if we can think of some of the current policies that are affecting this, and some of our solutions, would appreciate your perspective on that. Thank you. Michelle.
Well, as the elder in the group, I think I'm going to back up a few decades, building off of what Sean shared. But my parents experienced economic prosperity through the 50s and the 60s and into the 70s. And many young people today don't understand that that was part of our economic history. But starting in 1979, really our economy was dealt a very heavy blow with the rising OPEC prices. When that started to happen, inflation increased sharply, and real earnings of Americans started to decline precipitously at that time, and economic growth slowed. So it was at this time, as I go back and look at the analysis, that federal policy, which had been working for common man, began to work against the common man. And we just began that slow and steady march back to partisan politics in the 70s and 80s. President Reagan took office, and he had a conservative economic policy to tighten up cash flow and lower inflation. That impacted people. The farm crisis then hit the Midwest super hard in the 80s. I was a hog farmer at the time and felt that pain. NAFTA, enacted in the 1994 under the Clinton administration, led to trade deficits, factory closures, and job losses in manufacturing. All of this came together to put us in a place between 1979 and 2017 when agriculture went from employing 40% of our population to 2% of our population. Manufacturing has gone from employing 25% of the US population to 10% in the same time frame. So all of those good paying jobs have been replaced by non-union low wage service jobs, which don't provide full-time hours, benefits, or consistent schedules. Today, I don't see that we have a jobs problem. We have a living wage jobs problem, an abundance of jobs, but not jobs that will afford people the ability to cover the cost of basic needs. And it's been a
Really,
long time in the making. This didn't happen overnight.
really appreciate that. And not stealing your thunder at all, Michelle, but Michelle did upload some things to our community site. And I feel like some of the books that you recommended there are going to be helpful in digging into a little bit of what you said. And I also really appreciate you're able to provide that longitudinal look in this problem. So thank you for providing that perspective. Really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So I'm going to go back to Misty. Let's talk about the ideal state. Let's get out of the gloom and doom for a bit, and let's imagine and dream of an Iowa that's better for all Iowans. So what does that look like, and how can we get there?
Let's provide a living wage for all. That's hard to follow up with. Thank you for all of that, Michelle. I really appreciated that. I would like to see, as I've mentioned before, elevation of the profession as it pertains to childcare. I think that one of the things that we would like to see, that I would like to see, is not looking at a K through 12 program, but or a K through 12 process, but a 0 through 16 process where public funding covers where we're funding childcare and that early education, early childhood experiences the same way we fund K through 12. I think that would eliminate a lot of some of the things that we see now. I know there are for-profit centers, and I don't think that they're really turning a buck because of what we have to pay. But I'd like to see early childhood education publicly funded like we do K through 12. Elevation of the profession. As I mentioned before, understanding that childcare, it really is industry, all industry relies on a stable early childhood educational workforce. But also when we can eliminate barriers so that all children have access to quality education in their early years, formative years, they become better students, they become better citizens, and that just it's beneficial to everyone. So we focus so much, I think, a lot of times on childcare workforce and getting opening classrooms and things like that. But it's also about the quality of care that children are receiving, and why our mission is to remove barriers so that all children have access to that, so that they're ready for schools and schools are ready for them. It's hard, but it's really noble work. And I'm so lucky that I get to see, in spite of all of it, the passion that the people who choose to work in the field of early childhood education bring to the work that they do. So that's just really a recognition of how important the care is in 0 to 3, but the work that the people in the work are doing.
Yeah. I like your use of the word elevation for that. It feels like with all of these different issues, we are ignoring people's basic dignity and need to treat them in that way. Cool.
Yeah, I'm really glad that Missy brought up that early childhood education, because that's a large part of what we do here at YPN is education for prenatal through age 5. And I do think that there needs to be more funding for that, because we're seeing that without that education, children are then not prepared to go to school. And then it doesn't help break that generational cycle of, again, as I think Sean brought up earlier, with if their parents weren't able to afford something, and then it kind of just trickles down and we just see that decline. So if we were able to build more support throughout Iowa for early childhood and for parents who have children, or people who don't have children, everyone, and be able to supply people with a living wage that supports cost of living, where they're able to not only survive but thrive. Like, our goal in Iowa should not be that people are surviving and that they're being able to do the bare minimum. We want people to continue to grow and be able to really be the best people they can be in Iowa. And we want to be able to see our community continue to improve. So I think we need more support in that area.
Appreciate that. So hearing thriving and improvement. And actually, before I turn to Sean, I want to address a question that happened in the chat, just because I think it's a great baseline question. What is the minimum income necessary for a family of 4 to pay basics in Johnson County? Does anyone know that?
In Johnson County, I've got my graphic right up that
Okay.
if you go to comeandgetiowa.com and you go to our cost of living, you can find this out. So for a family of 4, an annual earnings in Johnson County, is that the question?
Yep.
$70,843.80 is the figure that we have at Common Good Iowa for making a basic bare bones budget for a family of four.
That's hard to move on from. That's a lot. That's a big number to meet the basics. All right, so we're going to get back to our positive focus on the ideal, Sean. So, what would you ideally like to see for Iowans, and how do you think we can get there based on all these
Yeah,
policies earlier?
yeah, a lot of, what was it? I like this. I like this kind of question of like, let's take a moment to like step back and just dream a little bit. What is that ideal? I think part of that ideal is a system in which the state of Iowa raises adequate taxes in an equitable way. So people who make more money and have more money pay more money into our system. That's an unfortunate non-reality of our current situation. I think another component of that ideal version of Iowa is one in which everybody can meet a basic budget and can when they work full time, they can afford to live, right? If you're working 40 hours a week, you should be able to afford it. That seems like something that we could probably all agree on, I hope. Is that you can, if you're going to put in the work, you should at least be able to do it. And then there are people who, in the reality of our society, there are going to be people who can't work full time, and those people should be supported as well. Because part of us as a society is that we're supporting each other. The people who can't get by, we're helping to lift them up. I care about my neighbors. I care about people across the state from me because they're my fellow Iowans, they're fellow humans, right? And there's plenty, one thing that I think we would bring to this ideal world is a mindset of abundance. We have so much in this state. We have so much in this country. We have so much money. We have food. We have water. We have shelter, especially in Iowa. We've got plenty of water here, not like some of those drought states. We've got so much here in Iowa. We've got skilled people. We have great educators. We have great childcare workers. And we really have enough resources to go around. The problem is one of distribution, and that's a policy choice. So how are we using policies to make sure that everybody has the resources that we are blessed with in the state? And so one way that we do this at Common Good Iowa is we put together a policy agenda that goes along with how can we, achieve that and how can we lift people up. And part of that policy agenda that I want to highlight is improving childcare assistance. That's a program through our state that's been incrementally getting a little bit better here and there, which is wonderful. Let's keep boosting it. That is another support system that is based on federal poverty level. So if we, are looking at 160% of the federal poverty level is the threshold for if you're below that, you can get assistance. There's a lot of people who need assistance who make just a little bit more than money than that, or a good amount more money than that, and still childcare is so expensive that they do need that assistance. So childcare assistance is one. Tax credits is one really useful tool for lifting people out of poverty. You think of the child tax credit was at the federal level. That was the biggest policy in recent years to lift people out of poverty. It lifted hundreds of thousands of children throughout the country out of poverty during the pandemic. That expired. We don't have a refundable child tax credit in Iowa. That's something that we could do that would make a huge impact on families in our state, especially single parents, who we know are the biggest group of people who can't afford a basic bare bones budget for their household. Last thing I'll also mention, policy-wise, is worker-centered policy, pro-worker policies, allowing workers to collectively bargain, to fight for their rights as workers, for better workplace conditions, for better pay. Historically, that is a really, really great way to lift up everybody. So we don't need the corporations to have more power. I think most Iowans actually do agree with that. For our differences in opinion, I think Iowans know that corporations already have plenty of power in the state. They have plenty of money. They have plenty of power. So let's give the power back to the workers.
All right. So I've heard quality, thrive, and lifting all up, and power back to the workers. Michelle, what do you have for us?
Well, Sean, you're my hero. I want to elevate in the conversation, and what I think few people realize is that low pay keeps prices low. And everyday low prices are good for consumers, for you and me, but they come at the expense of workers who aren't earning enough money to cover the cost of life's necessities. And the government makes up the difference. The poorest 20% of US households receive an average of $9,500 per person per year in government benefits. So family of four, that's about $38,000 a year, in addition to receiving federal earned income and child tax credits. So one reason that companies and businesses can keep wages low is because federal taxpayers, that's you and me and all of you out there, because federal taxpayers cover the cost of paying government benefits to those who can't earn a living wage. So that Big Mac is not as cheap as you think it might be, because you're paying for the lettuce, the tomato, the pickle, the condiments through your federal income tax bill. Federal government pays $130 billion a year, every year, to support working families living in poverty. So different policies could produce a different outcome. And to Sean's point, starting with a tax code that does not favor the wealthy, a better functioning educational system for everyone, more bargaining power for workers, and less tolerance for corporate consolidation. We do have antitrust rules on the books. They need to be observed. And last but not least, minimum wage in the state of Iowa. Minimum wage in the state of Iowa is $7.25. We're one of only 19 states out of 50 that adheres to that federal minimum wage. We need to triple the minimum wage in Iowa to allow people to make enough money to cover the cost of basic needs.
All right. So definitely that living wage is a theme, and we can definitely shoot above that for the ideal situation for Iowans. I want to go back, and Sean, you kind of made me think about this when you're talking about the resources, the abundant resources. Um, so I'd like to know from all of you, what are some of the strengths that we have to combat this issue? What have you seen that's working maybe at the local policy level or the state level? Any bright spots that we could perhaps emulate in other places?
That's funny. In Johnson County, with county and city support, have implemented a wage enhancement program for the childcare workforce. Qualifying teachers at qualifying centers make $2 an hour more on their base rate. And that was a collaboration, again, between the city of Iowa City and Johnson County. They pulled their ARPA funds. And so we are looking at engaging the business community with keeping that sustainable. But, I mean, we boosted the base salary of those teachers that qualify at qualifying centers by 20% with that partnership. We're really excited about that, and we're seeing some of that. We modeled that after a program in northern Iowa, and we're seeing it replicated in some communities throughout Iowa, and the state has some additional dollars that they are planning on investing into those programs as well. So, that's been a great thing that's come out of, some of our ARPA surplus. And, we recognized some of the challenges in our particular workforce were around wages. And so that's one of the things that we did.
Yeah. And we won't do a round robin this time. Anyone who wants to contribute to this question, I just thought it was interesting with the, hey, we have a lot to go on here in Iowa. How can we use some of it? And what are the models that are really working?
Well, in contrast to that, it was a tough legislative session for folks living in poverty last year. Hope to see some better outcomes next year. But we did see has been ratcheted down. SNAP benefits, food stamps have been minimized. But what I do see and what does hearten me is, to Sean's point, the community. Iowans historically show up to help when times are tough. When my dad was ill many years ago, the neighbors showed up to plant the corn. And I still see that today. In my role as CEO of Food Bank of Iowa, people show up, Iowans show up to help Iowans over and over and over again. And I get out of bed every day knowing that we care for one another and we can make a difference in the lives of others. And we see it with folks supporting what we do at Food Bank of Iowa, and then the many volunteers across the state of Iowa that are working in the space of food insecurity, serving at pantries or meal sites. Uh, but Iowans are a kind and generous state, and that gives me hope and helps me provide hope to the people we serve.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things here. One is one thing that I think is kind of a spark of hope for me that I think is really interesting and I'm excited to see play out is there are pilot programs and studies going on in Iowa and across the country, guaranteed basic income programs. And guaranteed basic income programs are different from universal basic income. So I want to make that distinction up front. Universal basic income programs, the idea behind those is that everybody gets, everybody, regardless of income, other income, gets a base amount. Guaranteed basic income or target income programs are more targeted to families who who need income supports. And so there's a pilot program going on based in Polk County. I forget the name of it right now, but it is providing $500 payments to families in a few different counties in central Iowa. And I'm really curious to see the results of that study. I think that there's a lot of push supported by industries and by governments throughout the country that is putting on these programs, and we're starting to see if results trickle in from those studies. So as we look into the future, I think that could be a really interesting model, and I think it's an interesting model because it's very similar in concept to something like a refundable tax credit, right? That we're hopefully all pretty familiar with, something like the earned income tax credit or the child tax credit at the federal level. This is something where, based on your income status and your family size and whatnot, you are getting a reduction in your tax liability to the point that you could get money back from the government. So kind of like the same thing, but instead of in arrears, you're getting it up front. And maybe instead of going into debt and then getting to pay off the debt, you just don't go into debt in the first place. So I think that's an interesting idea. I'm excited to see what happens with that. Another program that I want to point out, and I'm based in Iowa City personally, so I know a bit more about what's going on in Johnson County, so sorry for the favoritism. But something that Johnson County did, and the city of Iowa City and Coralville, and I think North Liberty as well, is they helped support a local nonprofit called the Center for Worker Justice of Eastern Iowa, to provide money from those different entities to hire a community organizer to combat wage theft. Wage theft is an issue that I'm working on a lot the last couple of years. And we find that employers are stealing over $900 million a year from Iowa workers because of wage payment violations, not paying the minimum wage, not paying overtime. And we have really bad enforcement. We have 2 or 3 people working on this at the state level. And so this effort by the local government to support this nonprofit and fight wage theft, this nonprofit, since hiring a new organizer, has recovered tens of thousands of dollars for workers. And I think that's really, really cool. So I think that is a lesson that the state can learn, and a kind of a policy idea that again is exciting to me.
To follow up on Sean, the name of that program, I live in Polk County, so I'll take ownership on that. But the name of the program is Uplift, the Central Iowa Basic Income Pilot, and it's being managed through the Mid-Iowa Health Foundation if people want to learn more about that. And to your point, Sean, on wage theft, some of it I think is wage law ignorance. And hopefully that organization will be providing information to employers so they have a better understanding of what's required under the law. Some of the wage theft I think is somewhat accidental, and maybe I'm naive, but I don't think people understand the law, workers or employers. So that could help as well.
Absolutely.
And have you seen any, Michelle, not to put you on the spot with that, have you seen any programs that have been able to do that given the diversity of the workforce that exists in Iowa?
With
Just educating people,
providing,
yeah.
well, I think it's really hard. I think that works through unions really well. I think the unions are very clear about communicating what the law requires. Although I was at one point in time a payroll supervisor for Mid-American Energy, many union contracts, many employees, and wage law it can be complicated. And it can be difficult for a small business to understand. Now, the big businesses should understand and know exactly what they're required to do. I'm not aware of any programs today where they're actively out engaging and educating our business and corporate community around what's required for wage law. But I think there's an opportunity there, Sean.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that. So I want to like go a little bit broader even on this question, and I invite people that are attending, what are your ideal? What is your ideal state? You heard of about the thriving, you heard about the living wage. Anything that you all want to see as far as an ideal future for Iowa when it comes to cost of living. And then go ahead and add any questions into the chat. So just like I guess I would love us to be bold in thinking about what the ideal state is for all of us. Have you seen anything in other states or in other countries where you really think we should be striving for all Iowans to flourish, if you will? What are the other things that, would make cost of living a little bit easier?
Yeah. One of the books that I loaded or uploaded is Give People Money, and it is about universal income versus basic income, and it has worked in countries like Norway. And the thought there is that everybody, regardless of their age or their socioeconomic status, get a certain sum of money every month. Let's say it's $1,000 every month. When you think about the federal government providing $180 billion a year in poverty support, transitioning that from poverty support to universal income wouldn't be that big of a stretch. People who had money would donate the money, most likely, or invest in arts and culture, or help a friend, a relative. So there are things that work in other countries. Minimum income in other countries has been very successful. But as we think about where we've come from as a society and where we're going, 100 years ago, there were elevator operators and blacksmiths and telephone operators and people behind the counter of every retail. As we go decade into decade, we see fewer jobs of that nature and more jobs that require highly skilled workers and people that have more in-depth educations in order to do those jobs. We've got to turn this around and find ways to pay people to live versus paying people to work, because in the next 30, 40, 50 years, I'll be gone. And so will a lot of these jobs that are paying people money when they don't have skills, they don't have education, or paying them some money to live. But that will not be the reality 50 years from today.
Really appreciate that, Michelle. Thank you. Anything else on that topic? All right. So, Misty, going to turn back to you and, maybe thinking about some of the families that you have seen, for the rest of you, and for you as well, Nicole, it can be an individual case. It could be anything else. But if there's one situation you wish our legislators could see to demonstrate the impact of their problem, what would that be? And let me just not say that, if there was one, let's say a problem, because that's kind of putting you on the spot to select the best one. It's just anything that, keeps you up at night, or any, any situation you've seen.
I think it's just so hard to be poor. And I don't think that even anyone that has not seen it firsthand or experienced it doesn't understand the problem upon problem upon problem. If you are a single mom who doesn't have transportation to get to your job across town, and so you rely on transit, and your 3-year-old has a temper tantrum when you're walking out the door, you miss your bus to get to daycare, and you've got to wait 20 minutes or an hour. And so that what does that how does that impact your employment if it happens all the time? You are working on your feet, and then the next day you have to do it again. Well, do you get up earlier? At what point do you do that? So I think it's just, I think about that all of the time. How difficult it is at baseline, and just if you add one more barrier, and I think about that a lot. There's so many barriers when you're living at baseline or below or whatever. So
Yeah, I really appreciate that. It's like people want to work, but we're making it difficult for people to work.
yeah.
Yeah. Nicole, can you think of any example?
Yeah, I would completely agree with that as well. I think one of the problems like I'm seeing is like, sorry, I'm trying to think of how to word this, but people who are in poverty, it's not from lack of effort or caring or trying. I think sometimes there is a viewpoint that they're just they just are fine, like living off the government. I've heard that from several people, and that is not the case. The families we work with and families I see around our community, they are busting their butts just to afford formula for their infant, to afford diapers, those bare minimum things. They are trying so hard. Some of our families work 3 jobs and they only see their kiddos at night when their kiddo is sleeping. These are problems. And they're not from lack of effort from people in Iowa. It's just from a flaw in the overall system and lack of support for these people.
Thank you, Nicole. I think that's very helpful to think of that person struggling like that. Sean?
Yeah, I really like what you said, Missy, and I'm thinking about, the legislators of our state, that go to Des Moines and serve in the House and the Senate. There's a certain level of exclusivity about that, even, about what kind of people can even make it to the state house. It's a part-time job, it doesn't pay a whole lot, but also you have to have a job that allows you to go for several months and live in Des Moines, and then ideally have a job when you get back, but that can't be your only job, right? And then what kind of opportunity cost is involved with going and serving in the legislature? What are you missing out on, even if you can afford, even if you can make that money stretch, or you can find other jobs to supplement that, can you afford to, the childcare necessary, or can you afford to move your family? I think, our political system, even just at the state level, kind of systematically excludes representation of people who who live in poverty, who live even below the 50th percentile. So we have to think about how do we change that, and also how can we encourage our current legislators to recognize that reality and say that's not how it should be in Iowa. That's not how it should be, and we should seek out that representation and make that kind of thing accessible to people across the spectrum. I think that's one way that that we skew our system, is by making it so that we have to have a certain threshold even to have access to the levers of power in our state. So that's one thing that I would encourage legislators to reflect on, or leaders throughout the state to reflect on.
Really appreciate that. Bringing it back to the people making the power. Thank you. Michelle.
I would like people to understand something I struggled with for years in trying to understand, and that being that individual effort in our country today does not determine who succeeds and who prospers, who remains impoverished and who is excluded in the United States, but it's really government policy and our deep-seated cultural and social mores. Um, we had the American dream. The American dream is our national ethos, where a set of ideals that include representative government, our rights, our liberty, our equality, in which freedom's interpreted as our individual right to prosperity. But that American dream seems to have fizzled out for so many people, where income keeps people back, low wages, lack of access to affordable education. It's hard for people now to be able to absorb student debt, and to better themselves through education. So I really see that poverty in the United States today is a choice, and it's a choice each one of us makes when we vote. Stagnant middle class wages, that's a choice. Technology fueled mass unemployment, it's a choice. Racism, it's a choice. Patriarchy, it's a choice. These are our choices, and we've got to have a paradigm shift to ensure that we have a stable economy going forward, one which benefits everyone fairly. No one's left behind. And I think of a young family that came into the food bank recently looking for food assistance. He has a construction job. She's off for a few weeks with a new baby. They had 4 other little boys over the course of the summer, couldn't feed all of those hungry little boys. And she said, my husband's got a great job and we're in a really good place. But right now, until I can go back to work, I just need a little help, just a little help. It's stories like that. I hear it over and over and over again. Everybody has a different situation, but it comes down to the fact that they're not making enough money to cover the cost of living.
Thank you, Michelle. And just thinking about um, your discussion about choice, we are making the choice for others to stay in poverty. And it leads to a last question. How can Iowans pitch in to make the situation better for our neighbors beyond making the right choice? And Misty, I'll start with you.
Um, I think advocacy goes a long way. I'm not sure who all is watching this, but looking is in with through the lens of childcare anyway, looking and seeing what's happening in your local community, what the needs are, what organizations in your community are doing to help that workforce and that industry and get on board. I think also really taking a deep dive into the business connection to the childcare industry, to that workforce. How does your community rely on childcare? Are businesses coming into your community, or are they not because of lack of childcare? Just finding out what's happening in your communities, because I live in an urban area and things are happening differently here than they are in rural parts of our state. But we have a pretty diverse landscape of living here in Iowa. So finding out what the needs of your community are and getting involved and advocating.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, I would say for sure, finding out how you can help in your community. I love what someone said earlier about how Iowans show up for Iowans. And I think there's so many opportunities, no matter where you live in your community, to get out there and to help, whether that's volunteering, whether you want to make a donation to an organization that you think is doing something great, voting, making those choices. Like, these are all really important things. And I think people sometimes wonder, like, well, I don't know how that affects me. I don't know how I can help. But like, there's so many different avenues, and all it takes is a Google search of like organizations near me with such and such goal. Like, educate yourself, go find things to do, go find community members to lift up.
Thank you, Nicole. Sean.
Oh, yeah. I love that. And I love this question. I think what my mind always go to if somebody's like, what can I do, is, and from my perspective, it's get engaged with the political system. I mean, engagement with the political system in Iowa was actually quite low, encourage other people to be engaged with the political system. We're not going to have that paradigm shift unless people make it clear that we need and want that in the state. I can understand, though, at the same time, why so many people don't. It can be really disappointing to send a bunch of emails to your representative and feel like nothing really happened, or that you weren't heard, or that it didn't really make a difference. And yet you never know when the words that you choose or the conversation that you bring up will make a difference. And you don't know how that's being interpreted by this person. So, talk to your leaders, talk to representatives, make them think about these problems. That's to me, that's really, the basis of how we make changes, by collectively working to access the power and to make those changes at the system-wide level.
Not to put you on the spot, Sean, for those of the folks who have not spoken to their legislators before, are there tools that can make it a little bit easier?
Great question. There absolutely are. So if you even Google something like Iowa, find my legislator, or words like that, you'll probably get it. Find my legislator, and they will. There's actually some good tools online that will, if you just put in your address, it'll give you the list of all your representatives and the state level, even at the federal level, and give you their phone numbers, email addresses, and you can get in contact with them. They also, if you follow your representatives on social media, or get their newsletters, they'll oftentimes tell you about opportunities to come and talk to them in person. So that is actually probably the most valuable thing you can do, is to talk to somebody in person, because your personal stories are the things that are the most impactful for legislators, is hearing the personal stories of people that they represent. So go tell them about it. Tell them about what it's like for you and about what it's like for your neighbors.
Thank you. Hey, Michelle.
I encourage people to reject the status quo. How we're living today is not good enough. It's not good enough for everyone. And to Sean's point, become an educated, informed voter. And one of the books I read recently that really helped with my perspective is The Upswing by Robert Putnam. And that was very eye-opening for me. But become educated on policy and how policy drives the economic outcomes for all Americans, and show up. But we hear so much today. Everywhere I go, employers are saying, well, people just don't want to work. And employers are saying people got used to going to pantries during COVID. So it's been normalized. No, that's not the case. People are going to food pantries because they need the help, because they're not making enough money to put food on the table. Reject these ideas, do your own research, learn, come to the Food Bank of Iowa for a visit, come to our website, go to Common Good Iowa to learn more, read, and talk to your lawmakers and your elected government officials at the city level, the county level, the state level, and the federal level, and get involved. If you want things to be different, it's not going to happen when you're sitting at home in your easy chair watching Yellowstone. That is not going to make your world a better place. So get up, get out, learn more, and use your voice.
Not that you can't do that, but just do something in addition to that, right?
Well,
All
yeah,
right.
I do both.
All right, 20 seconds each. Closing thought, pitch, plug for anything. Missy.
I would just say again, really looking at how the business community is affected by childcare and lack thereof in your community.
Perfect.
We need to make
Nicole.
that connection.
Just want to say the importance of earlyhood child education and how you can support that in your community. yeah, and empower families.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean.
You can learn more about the cost of living from Come and Get Iowa, comeandgetiowa.org, and we'll also be coming out later this year with a new cost of living report. So keep your eyes out for that. We'll have some interesting new data, kind of further in past the peak of the pandemic. So that'll be an interesting insight.
Thank you, Michelle.
I'm going to close with a quote from Ulysses S. Grant from his visit to Des Moines in 1875. If we are to have another contest in the future of our national existence, I predict the dividing line will not be Mason and Dixon, but between patriotism and intelligence on one side, superstition, ambition, and ignorance on the other. So, the point drawn by this is that the plight of poor in our own backyard, ignoring it could lead to dire circumstances. We need to pay attention to this issue today.
Let's do it. Let's pay attention. Let's pitch in. Thank you so much to Missy, Nicole, Sean, and Michelle for your participation, and all of you who are attending. Please stay tuned for the implementation of school choice in Iowa at 10:45. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.